Washington Commanders, Green Bay Packers, every crucial piece of information you need to know for your fantasy teams and player picks and projections right here in 15 minutes. If you've never been here before, welcome. My name is Max. I make these for every single primetime game, as well as an overall video for the Sunday games, looking at coverage data, run scheme metrics, and overall statistical trends to give you a unique edge as it relates to, again, your fantasy teams, player picks, using stats that not a lot of people talk about, leaning into the film and schematics of the actual game of football instead of just the numbers. Without further ado, we're going to get into this, break this game down. But before we do, I want to make sure you guys know any extra picks that I may have will be on my Twitter, first and foremost, as well as Instagram and TikTok. Plenty of short form content on there for you. Make sure you're locked in over there. If you're not already, we had a Dalton Kincaid first touchdown smack on Twitter on Sunday night. So make sure you're locked in over there. But let's talk about this game. And I want to start with the Packers defense before we start with anything else. But the most important thing to note about this Packers defense is the schematics and how it relates to running back receiving production. If you guys watched my video last week, the number one thing I highlighted was David Montgomery receptions, which hit, but Jahmyr Gibbs had 10 catches against them. Like, running back receptions against the Green Bay Packers are extremely important when you're looking at it from your fantasy teams, your player picks, because they just sit back in zone. That's what they do. They want to make you throw the ball quick, get it out quick, and they're going to bend, not break, hopefully get after the quarterback on third down. Now they have Micah Parsons to do that. They feel like they can be in a good spot by making you uncomfortable, rallying to the ball, and not allowing you to take deep shots down the field. That's the reality of it. So you could see last game, Jared Goff had 39 pass attempts and the second most completions out of any quarterback in the NFL last week with 31. Now, some of that could be a game flow thing, but I ask you right now, do you think the Commanders are a better team than the Packers? Do you think the Commanders will control the game? I personally don't. I think the game flow is less important here, but 14 running back receptions across Gibbs and Montgomery last week for only 49 yards, might I add. It's just checkdowns. Like I said, the Packers defense flies around. They rally to the football. The other outlier here, 79 tight end yards allowed last week, the eighth most in the NFL. We'll talk a little bit about what that means, but I don't want to lean too much into it. Now, in terms of the coverage, like I said, they play the third most zone in the league. 90.7% of their snaps last week were zone. Now, when you look at the Washington Commanders, who gets the most targets per route run and the most yards per route run against zone, Deebo Samuel is number one. Deebo Samuel is number one in terms of how many targets he's getting. The Giants sat back in a good amount of zone last week. He had a pretty solid game. Then Austin Eckler, right? Anytime Austin Eckler's out on a route, nothing's happening. He's getting the check down. Now, Bill Krosky-Merritt's probably going to play a little bit more in week 2. How that affects Austin Eckler, I don't really think it will in the pass game, to be honest with you. I think Eckler is still a pass game back, but zone targets per out run, Deebo, Eckler, Noah Brown, Bill Krosky-Merritt, and Terry McLaurin at 5. Now, Terry McLaurin's at 4 for yards per out run, but it's still Deebo, Brown, and Eckler ahead of him. So those are the three guys I'm personally looking at based on the coverage that the Packers are going to play, but we still have to talk about the target rate. So in terms of out wide targets, the Green Bay Packers allowed outside targets at the 23rd highest rate last week, slot targets at the 30th highest rate last week, which is a little concerning for Deebo, inline targets at the 19th highest rate, and backfield targets at the highest rate. Makes sense, right? On the other side of the ball, offensively, the Commanders threw to the outside of the 13th highest rate, so I'm not going to lean too much into that. To the slot at the second highest rate, though. That's what's a little concerning, a little confusing to me, to be honest with you. And when you look at the slot production, Deebo had the most routes from the slot. Zach Ertz had the most routes from, or second most routes from the slot, and Terry McLaurin had 6. But when you compare targets per route run, Zach Ertz had a higher target per route run than Deebo from the slot. We talk about the 79 tight end yards allowed. How much does that matter against zone? Is Zach Ertz going to be the inline guy they target? I think there's some substance there, but truthfully, I'm not going to lean into it too much for right now. But if you want to look at somebody, I think Zach Ertz is a pretty solid option to look at, but we'll break down some of these numbers a little bit later in the video. And then Terry McLaurin has 1 target from the slot. So if you're picking up what I'm putting down, when the Commanders throw the ball, it's probably going to go to the slot or it's probably going to go to the backfield. Deebo is the slot guy, but Zach Ertz had a higher target per route run from the slot. The issue is, I believe 4 of these 5 targets, the majority of these targets were against man, not zone, against man. The Packers aren't going to play man, guys. That's just what they do. Inline, Commanders are throwing to the 30 at the lowest rate in the NFL. And then backfield, they're average. They like to check the ball down to Austin Eckler because he can make plays after the catch. He's a good player. Austin Eckler had 12 routes, and then Bill Krosky-Merritt and Jeremy McNichols each had 4 from the backfield. So Eckler had triple each of their routes. Eckler is still the main backfield guy. And in terms of targets, Eckler had 3, Bill Krosky-Barrett only had 1. So Eckler to me still is the main backfield receiver. I do like Austin Eckler in this game. Now, in terms of run scheme metrics, it's very interesting because the Packers' run defense is really good, right? 2.09 yards per carry last week. Who's a better run offense than the Lions? The Ravens? Maybe the Bills, just holistically? Like, they ran the ball really well. Now, the Commanders also ran the ball really well, partially because of Jaden Daniels. But when you look at where they are good and where the Packers are bad, there's a very unique marriage here. In terms of man gap schemed runs, the Packers were really good in zone, really good overall, but we're not good against man gap. 4.29 yards per carry against man gap scheme runs. Commanders had 7.09 yards per carry against man gap scheme runs, and 23 of the 24 runs for the Washington Commanders last week against the Giants were in those man gap schemed runs, guys. It's very, very important to note that the way the Commanders run the football, they're going to have I think they're going to have success against the Packers because of the marriage of them being really good at a certain type of run and the Packers not being able to stop that certain type of run. Now, it is also important to note the history versus mobile quarterbacks from this Packers defense. Last year, 5 games really. Jalen Hurts, 33 yards. Anthony Richardson, 37 yards. Kyler, 14. Caleb Williams, 70. And then Caleb Williams, 10 again. So looking at these Vegas projections, again, this is all advice. This is for entertainment purposes strictly. Tail at your own caution. But these are the numbers that I'm looking at that pop out in Vegas. You'll see no Zach Ertz. I'm not leaning into Zach Ertz for right now. But for Deebo Samuel, 4.5 receptions is a solid number. Again, the way I look at these things, and I'll talk Packers here in a second, I tend to go receptions before I go yards against zone, right? You're just going to sit back in zone completions. Yards are hard to predict. Against man, I tend to lean yards compared to receptions because you have chunk plays. And if you're beating somebody in man-to-man, chances are there's less people around you physically because they're all focused on their man to stop you after the catch, right? Deebo, 4.5 receptions is solid. What I really like is Austin Eckler, 2.5. Like that to me is a couple checkdowns, a screen pass or 2. I think you could play that even higher than 3, but I really like Austin Eckler. And again, it's receptions before yards. What's really interesting with Jaden Daniels, I won't gloss over Bill Krosky-Barrett, but Bill Krosky-Barrett, again, if he's going to play more, that 39.5 number for rush yards, even if that Packers defense is good, it's going to be a closer game. I don't think they're going to get away from the run. I think it's solid. I also think explosive runs could be there, but the Packers, the issue is, don't really allow a ton of explosive runs, so they never really have. This number for Jaden Daniels, though, I want to talk about. 20.5 completions. In a game where Packers are probably going to sit back in zone, right? They're going to force a dink and dunk offense, a check down offense to beat them. If the Commanders are down, like Jaden Daniels might throw the ball close to 40 times. Now, you can look at attempts if you want. I think attempts are a little harder to predict, but I trust Jaden Daniels' efficiency, his average depth of target, the pass catchers around him, the screen game that Cliff Kingsbury will always have. Just get the ball out quick. Just get the ball out quick. Just get the ball out quick. So I like that for Jaden Daniels above everything else. But that is the breakdown for the Packers defense. Let's talk Commanders defense very briefly because there's really not a ton of data on the Commanders defense. Now, I'll preface the Commanders defense talk by saying it was the Giants without their starting left tackle and Russell Wilson's first start. So everything in terms of overall success probably should be taken with a grain of salt, but the only data outlier here is the 37 pass attempts. Was that a game flow oriented thing? I kind of think so. I think if the Giants were winning, they would have run the ball more, but they did run the 8th most man-to-man last week. They lined up across from the Giants pass catchers, who they probably thought they were better than, and said, we're playing man. I think the Commanders will like their matchups in man again this week against the Packers. I think they feel Mike Sanders still, Marshawn Lattimore, like those guys are better than the Packers pass catchers. Now, when they played zone, there's lots of quarters variation. So cover 4, you had palms, you had cover 6, a lot of quarters variations with the Packers didn't really see a lot last week with the Lions. So I actually expect a little bit more of that this week, but it's all match based. So it's essentially it's not man-to-man, but you're playing zone. As soon as they enter a certain vicinity of your zone, it's man-to-man. So it's a lot of match-based stuff. We can lean into the man data as a result. What's interesting, and you guys have heard me talk about this, and the numbers backed me up last year, but like Tucker Kraft against man, like that just hasn't really been a thing. Most targets per route run against man last week. 4th most yards per route run against man last week. He had a great game taking advantage of matchups Jordan Love felt were beneficial. And the most targets per out run last week against man was Tucker Kraft, which is crazy. It's crazy to know. Now, in terms of target rates, the Commanders are allowed outside targets at the 26th highest rate, slot targets at the highest rate, inline targets at the 27th highest rate, and backfield targets at the 13th highest rate. Again, nothing really to write home about here in terms of offensively. The Packers, you can look at the numbers, 20, 21, 19, and 6. They are below average in everywhere except for the inline tight end position, which they threw at the 6th highest rate. Now, you can almost couple the inline tight end targets and the slot targets together. I think that's okay to do. But when you look at the slot production, it was Jaden Reed who had the most routes from the slot, with Tucker Kraft having the second most. Dontavian Wicks had 3. Then targets, Jaden Reed had 4. Tucker Kraft had 1. And Savion Williams, I believe. Williams had 1. Here's the reality, guys. The Packers offense right now, and just in general, is going to be really hard to predict. You have to, and I'm going to talk about this in a second here, you have to feel wildly confident in a matchup based on past data, which we don't have, it's week 2, or an explosive play against man-to-man coverage. We're going to get man-to-man coverage here, guys. That's the reality of it. We're going to get man-to-man coverage. I'm going to talk run scheme data here in a second just so we know. But man-to-man coverage it's not a cheat code. That's not the right word. But Packers specifically, and if you guys were subscribed last year, you know how much success we had looking at guys like Christian Watson, even Jaden Reed at times, just longest catch, because they could beat somebody one-on-one, create separation, and make a play after the catch. And like, you look at Jordan Love last week against the Lions defense, like, he threw the ball 22 times. It's not like he's going to have a crazy pass stat line if the game is close or if they're winning. That's not going to happen. But 188 yards. The chunk plays were there. That's more than 10 yards per completion, guys. The chunk plays are going to be there. That is what I am looking at more specifically. And again, when you look at these Packers receivers, like Jaden Reed, 15 yards a catch. Romeo Doubs is 34 yards a catch. Wicks, 15 yards a catch. Now, Tucker Kraft didn't really have a ton, but I really, really like the explosive play potential for some of these guys. Now, going back to the data, the run scheme metrics, Packers are going to run the ball a ton. We can go back one more time to the rushing stats here. They did not run the ball well at all against the Lions. Josh Jacobs still carried the ball almost 20 times, and he got in the end zone. Now, I am looking at these numbers thinking, okay, Josh Jacobs probably not going to have a wildly efficient day, but if I really trust the game flow here, why can't Josh Jacobs carry the ball 20 times again? Do you really trust the game flow? I personally don't know. I personally think this is going to be a closer game, but if the game flow goes in the Packers' direction, it doesn't matter how efficiently they can run the ball. Josh Jacobs is going to run the ball. Now, when looking at pass catchers, I'll talk Matthew Golden on socials a little bit later this week, so you make sure you're locked in over there. But the 4 guys I'm looking at, Jaden Reed, 3.5 receptions, which is at plus money. I don't love it. Yards, all it takes is 1. Kraft, 2.5 receptions, I do like. I do like that one. Him and Eckler, I do like a lot. And Debo. 33.5 yards. Again, you go back, Kraft had 8 yards a catch last week, 2 catches for 16 yards. I don't mind the yards, but when you look at Kraft's overall production, he's never been a crazy explosive play guy. When we talk about explosive plays against man coverage, the pass catchers have to be explosive too. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Dobbs, 3.5 receptions at plus money. I don't love it. 40.5 though, like, all it takes is 1 big catch or 2 big catches. Dontavian Wicks, 1.5, 22.5 yards. All it's going to take is 1 big catch from him. So the moral of the story here is, guys, the Packers pass catchers are kind of where you have to lean in this game. And it's scary. I'm with you. I don't confidently, and I don't advise this, don't confidently lean into it. But if you're going to lean into something, it's a longest catch or it's yards. I find it so hard to believe that any Packers receiver is going to get peppered with 10 targets. Unless Matthew Golden comes on, which I'll talk about a little bit later this week on socials. Unless Matthew Golden comes on and figures things out immediately, there's no way. I don't see a consistent 10 target per game receiver in this offense. So, moral of the story here, lean into a longest reception, I guess, if you want to, but kind of just staying away here. But on the other side, I do like Eckler. I do like Debo. And I honestly don't mind Jaden Daniels. I really don't mind Jaden Daniels. Let's talk injury report, though, because this is also important. So the Commanders, we'll start with them because they're pretty healthy. they're going to be fine. Like, they're going to be rolling the defense out that held the Giants to 6 points. Again, it's the Giants. How much do you lean into that? I don't really know, but they're going to be pretty healthy walking this Thursday night game. And you can see Jaden Daniels with the wrist injury, full participation Monday, Tuesday, and you see on Wednesday he will be as well. The Packers, though, is interesting because the offensive line is beat up. It is beat up. Zach Tom, Aaron Banks, like, these guys are beat up, which is, again, why I hesitate to lean into any type of Josh Jacobs thing here, because he's going to be running behind a beat-up offensive line or offensive line without starters. A couple other things that are important to note. Brenton Cox did not participate. Now, another guy who I think is important in this equation, but I don't really think too much of it as it relates to McLaurin and Debo, is Bo Melton. He didn't participate again. Like, the DB depth for Green Bay, it's not like they're going to line up and say, okay, let's go play man. No, these guys are going to sit in spots on the field. They're going to sit in spots on the field and make Jaden Daniels dink and dunk to beat them. The Commanders don't want to do that. Cliff Kingsbury probably doesn't want to do that either. I don't know. I don't think the Packers DB injuries are as important as the offensive line for sure. So looking at this injury report, I don't think it means too much for the Commanders offense against the Packers defense, but for the Packers offense against the Commanders defense, I don't love it. So that is everything you need to know about this game. Again, you like Deebo Samuel a lot. You like Austin Eckler a lot. Some Packers pass catcher or pass catchers, a big explosive play. Who do you think is the most explosive? I think it's Jaden Reed. I think it's Matthew Golden. But because of Tucker Kraft's matchup, the pass production here, I don't mind Tucker Kraft either. But that is everything you need to know about this matchup breakdown. Again, if you're new, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any other videos. Our Sunday breakdown, our Monday Night Football breakdown, which has 2 games this week, as well as an overall fantasy ranking video coming later this week. I appreciate you guys watching. If you did enjoy, please do leave a like. It helps me out a ton, helps me continue to do this for you guys. As always, picks on social. This is not advice. Tailor your own caution. God bless. I will see you guys next time. Enjoy Thursday Night Football.